Mega Man X was released in Japan in 1993 and North America and Europe in 1994 for the SNES. It was praised by both critics and fans, especially after 6 NES games, for its innovation, kick-ass gameplay, and presentation. It sold around 1 million units, which is great for Mega Man standards at least. To this day, Mega Man X is still considered one of the best games on the Super Nintendo, regardless of nostalgic feelings or whatever. I personally loved this game when I was younger and felt stupid for not agreeing with the popular opinion that
Mega Man 2 is the best Mega Man game.
I didn't actually beat the game until like 2 years ago, when I got my interest in playing the rest of the X games and grew even more appreciation for it. So why not look at all Mega Man X games more in depth and see if they hold up to this day and see which ones are better than the others. I present to you Mega Man X. This is Mega Man we're talking about. What's the point of a fucking plot summary? Well, I guess I'll do it, but gonna keep it short. Dr. Light constructed a robot called X to be a successor to Mega Man. X, however, had to be tested for 30 years to prove that his ability to think for himself wouldn't cause any harm to the humanity. Dr. Light wouldn't last that long, so he sealed X away for someone to find him. Fast forward 100 years, a scientist, Dr. Kane, found X's capsule and after realizing his potential, created a whole population of Reploids, robots modeled after X. Everything was well and good until a virus called the Maverick virus started spreading. The infected Reploids would attack humans, which led to the creation of the Maverick Hunters. Things change when the hunter leader, Sigma, the strongest Reploid, turns Maverick. Maverick started a big war, brings us the beginning of the game. After an intro stage, X gets beaten up by a Maverick named Wile. Just then, the new leader of the Maverick Hunters, Zero, comes to the rescue. After saving you, he gives you a speech about how you're a weakling and how he's stronger than you and that you suck in everything. Okay, not really, but still. After that, you're sent to defeat 8 Mavericks, those being Chill Penguin, Spark Mandrill, Armored Armadillo, Launch Octopus, Boomer Coanger, Sting Chameleon, Storm Eagle, and Flame Mammoth. After doing just that, X and Zero meet at Sigma's castle to kick his ass once and for all. Zero and Vile fight each other with Zero actually losing the fight. X comes to the rescue, but fails because he's a bitch. Zero then self-destructs to destroy Vile's body armor, leaving X and Vile in a duel. After wrecking the shit out of Vile, X meets Zero dying. After outing his last words, Zero disintegrates. X continues through the castle, meeting Sigma in the end and gets the job done. The game ends with the X questioning why must the war go on, another I'm 14 and this is deep bullshit. So that's it for the plot summary. I will credit this game for its ideas and how intriguing it is on paper. While the story itself is great, the way it's presented in-game leaves a lot to be desired. Firstly, what the fuck is this intro cutscene? I mean, it shows Dr. Kane logging into Light's computer, I think, but it doesn't tell you anything meaningful. Why not have the intro cutscene explain the events that take place before the game? That leads us into our next problem. You don't get to know anything about the Maverick virus, nor Light, nor Kane, nor Reploids, nor anything, without reading the manual or searching it up on the internet. The game just has the lame intro cutscene and then boom, you're on a highway. Even then, after the intro stage, the story takes even more of a backseat, with nothing important happening until reaching Sigma. After that, the story is executed pretty well, I think, but it's the endgame. I couldn't really care anymore about anything since I don't know shit. I know the characters get a lot of praise, but honestly, I never saw Zero as some sort of big mentor figure. Especially since when you get all the upgrades, he is still stronger than you, so this whole become like Zero thing, I don't get. Maybe if I could read English at 8, I would have felt differently. Don't get me wrong, I still like Zero, and he is going to become a better character later on, but I think his execution in this game could have been better. Wile is a dick, and it is admittedly satisfying to kick his ass in the end. That's all I have to say. X is okay, I guess. He doesn't really have a personality in this game. Dr. Kane isn't mentioned once. And last and probably least, there's Sigma. He gets mentioned once before defeating 8 Mavericks. After that, the only thing you see is his face in the stage select. You don't see him in person until the very end. Some may argue that this adds to the mysteriousness of him, and that's fair, but I'm just simply uninterested. During the final battle he tells you like 3 sentences, then dies, and after the credits, tells you that he's got more bodies. Like if I should care. Sigma is not a terrible villain, he's just painfully underwhelming.
I'm sure they'll improve in future games.
Okay, I came off as incredibly negative. Gotta say some good things before I piss off everyone. This may come off as hypocritical, but I'm glad they didn't make the story super big, because that would have slowed the pacing down to a crawl. I was only asking for a bit more, with maybe the start button being a skip cutscene button. Even then, the game still has more story than any other platformer of its generation. Then again, what's there to compare? Bubsy? In the end, the story itself is good, it's just the way it's presented in-game that leaves me disappointed. Mega Man X has a really nice art style, both in the concept art and the game itself. All sprites have dark outlines, making them look like a cartoon, but with an anime vibe to it. The characters have been redesigned to capture a more futuristic feeling of the world. In fact, Zero was apparently supposed to be the redesigned Mega Man, but they thought it was too different. That makes sense, since it's definitely weird having Mega Man with long blonde hair and green nipples. In addition to that, the sprites themselves are well drawn and have aged better, in my opinion, than many other 4th gen games. The 16-bit era games that were the most impressive at the time now look dated and sometimes hurt to look at, so I'm glad that Mega Man X doesn't try to make itself look photorealistic. However, at the same time, I feel like they could have tried a little harder. Not to say that the game looks bad or anything, as I just said, it has aged quite well and is serviceable, but I have a few nitpicks. First of all, why is there only one layer of parallax scrolling backgrounds? They didn't need to make 30 different backgrounds for one stage and make it look like you're high or something, but sometimes I feel like X is walking next to a 2D picture with no depth, if that makes any sense. For another thing, while the game is animated well, some sprites have animations of just one frame, making some characters look out of place. Lastly, the color palette is a bit lacking. Most levels have a very greyish or brownish color, making them look uninteresting. To be fair, there are sections where the levels are colorful and seem lively, but I don't know if it's the contrast or what that makes it look a bit dry. I went a bit too negative again, but I'm just trying to prove some points. The game still looks great, but could have been better. One part where I can't possibly be negative in any way, and you probably saw this coming, the motherfucking soundtrack. You know you're getting into some good shit when you hear just the title screen. And the rest is even better. The music sets up the story very well. When you get beaten up by Weil, the feeling of helplessness is accentuated by the music, or the absolutely amazing Zero's second theme. Seriously, even though I don't care for Zero too much in this game, this is where the real men cry. All levels and bosses have catchy, usually rock-heavy themes that are the definition of unforgettable. Actually, the Maverick boss theme sounds like it was from Mario or something. If I had to play all the songs I like, then half of this video would be just that. Even the fucking password screen theme is fantastic. Are there any weak tracks? Well, Sigma's first boss theme has a pathetically short loop, and I guess the second stage select theme doesn't really set the mood. These songs don't go any lower than good. The only drawback is the SNES sound chip, but even then, that's not the game's fault. And there's a remastered soundtrack in the Maverick Hunter X remake. In the remastered soundtrack, the electric guitar isn't present as much, making me prefer the SNES counterpart. I'd say it's still good, I mean the compositions are the same, and that's enough. So the soundtrack, phenomenal in every possible way and probably one of the best on the Super Nintendo. Like, I'd say I love it just as much as the DKC2 soundtrack. Easily one of the best parts of the game. Also about Maverick Hunter X. Haven't played it, But I know some things, like how the story is better executed with a whole anime prequel, The Day of Sigma, the soundtrack and some armor capsule locations have been changed, like how you get the dash in Flame Mammoth stage, which is dumb if you ask me. This is the only analysis of the original Mega Man X and that only the Super Nintendo version. No other version was ever released in the 90s. So Mega Man X was also released on the DOS in 1995. I have no experiences with this version and I don't think I'm missing much. If you're interested, there are a few reviews and comparisons on YouTube. There's also a bootleg Genesis port, but it's so painfully stupid and different that I may as well make an April Fool's review on it. Actually, that's not that bad of an idea. So finally, onto the gameplay. It would have maybe been simpler if we started this review series with the classics, but the problem with them is that their quality is so painfully consistently good that reviewing them would honestly be uninteresting. I mean, I couldn't even rank them. The X series is, spoiler alert, a whole different beast. Base X has all the moves of Mega Man except the slide, meaning he can jump and shoot, move left and right, even charge his buster. A new move is wall jumping, which doesn't work like in most other games. Instead of having to bounce off multiple walls, you can do it on just one. This ability is fantastic and has saved my ass from bottomless pits and enemies. You can even shoot while sliding down walls. The only problem is that X doesn't have the slide, meaning that his walking speed is his maximum speed, which is super slow. This is accentuated in the intro stage. It may be designed well when it comes to the game mechanics, it may be iconic, but this level is boring. Not only because of the lack of slide, but also because the level design is just a straight line with enemies on it. There's nothing interesting about it. Why am I mentioning this now? Because the 8 Maverick levels contain armor capsules hidden by Dr. Light in order for X to find them. The first upgrade are the leg parts, which allow you to do a dash. Dash is basically the slide from the classics, but when jumping carries your momentum, making the game automatically faster paced. I'll get into a big problem with it later on. The body parts lower the damage you take by 50%. You would think this makes the game too easy, but even with it, you'll still be challenged because in the later game, enemies and bosses deal a lot of damage. The arm parts let you charge your buster up to a 3rd level, and even the special weapons, which wasn't a thing in the classics. Last and most definitely least are the head parts, which let you break walls. That's it. So you'd think that levels will be filled with them, leading you to optional goodies. Well, there's a part in Armored Armadillo stage with 2 health pickups, and you also need it for the arm parts. So you'd think, oh, that's cool, yeah, right, just gonna get the head to do the shoot. And yeah, the arm parts are pretty cool, but if you defeat Y without the upgraded buster, Zero will give you his buster, making this upgrade entirely and utterly useless. It doesn't make the gameplay worse, not even close, but there's so much lost potential here and I'm baffled that the developers didn't notice a problem with this. Having all parts means that you have built light armor, and just as the name suggests, it's not much, especially when compared to future armors, but it does its job and pretty well at that, so no complaints there. But the armor pieces aren't the only upgrades you can find. Each Maverick stage has 1 heart container hidden in it. They serve to upgrade your health, since you start the game with very low max energy, but collecting all the hearts, you'll double it, so meaning with the body parts, it's essentially quadrupled. In addition to that, you can also get the 4 sub-tanks. They're similar to E-tanks, but once you use them, you don't lose them. But instead you have to refill them by collecting health pickups when with full energy. Do I have to explain why these are great? Well, the only problem is that regardless of your health, the entire sub-tank will be wasted. But even then, you can just use it only when you have low health. So the upgrades I think are a great addition to the Mega Man formula. They were added because of the growing popularity of RPGs, and I think it worked out quite well. Or maybe not. The issue with the leg parts I mentioned earlier is that without them, most other upgrades are unreachable and the game is instantly more arbitrarily difficult, because you can't dodge enemy bullets or other things without them as well. Now, all the stages are beatable without them, with the bottomless pits being wide enough for you to jump over, but the bosses really aren't. Even then, the game just simply isn't fun. You get the lag parts in Chill Penguin stage, meaning that if that's somehow your last stage of choice, you're screwed. The best way to fix this would have been to just give you the damn thing at the end of the intro stage. This isn't a problem to me, since I was lucky enough to choose Chill Penguin stage first, because I probably thought,
Fucking bird, what you gonna do, take a shit on me?
but this is still a dumb design decision. While still on the topic of upgrades, they are actually placed well in stages and their locations are usually pretty easy to see. Maybe there's an exception or two, but the majority is genius. Many of them have different ways of obtaining, like, for example, in Boomer Commander's stage, there's a heart piece over there. Now, I'm probably supposed to use the boss's weapon to get it, but that means that I have to replay most of the stage again, so I can just use the upgraded shotgun ice here and get it immediately. Another cool thing is that when you beat a certain stage, most likely another one will be changed. After defeating Chill Penguin, Flame Mammoth stage will be frozen over, or how Spark Mandrill stage gets all dark and broken because Storm Eagle's airship crashed there, just to name a few. In Flame Mammoth and Sting Chameleon stage, this is useful, but in Spark Mandrills, it's kinda useless and actually makes your experience worse. This addition makes Mega Man X's world feel so much more real and kinda gives it a personality. All the upgrades are executed well, except for the stupid fucking Hadouken. Yeah, they put this Street Fighter move into a Mega Man X game, and it's ass. First of all, you have to die 3 times at the end of Armored Armadillo stage with all the possible upgrades. If getting it wasn't awkward enough, performing it is even worse. I know that it's the same control scheme as in the Street Fighter, but whenever I try doing it, it most likely fails, and by that time you'll get hit, which means that you can't use it since you need full health. So with all these drawbacks, you'd think that it must be OP as fuck, and it is. It kills every enemy and even bosses in one hit. Killing Sigma or Wild with it is just admittedly kinda funny, but the process of getting it and performing it makes it just not a very satisfying final reward. So I guess it's about time I should talk about the levels and their design. Firstly, the level design as a whole is very linear. This isn't a problem since an advantage to a linear level with just one pathway is that developers can focus all their resources on that one pathway and do not have to split them into 100 different ones. This means that the levels in Mega Man X have polish to them, but they still have their elements of exploration that make them satisfying. Unlike classic Mega Man, this game has a much bigger emphasis on shooting things. Enemies are everywhere and will ambush you, leaving you with little to do other than shoot. A downside to this is that the platforming takes a backseat. This isn't actually noticeable on a regular playthrough since there is still platforming, but this time I noticed it more than ever. However, it doesn't feel repetitive, even if you're only using the Buster, because the enemy AI and their designs are always distinct. Plus, you never have to outright mash Y, because they have pretty low health and most of them die with a charge shot. As I said, their designs are always different and that applies to stages. It is expected that this game will have distinct locations and variety in its level themes, but that's also in a way applies to the level design. You can't replace the graphics from, say, Armored Armadillo stage with the ones from Flame Mammoths. It just wouldn't work because the level design is also considerate of the level's theme. Each stage also has 1 or 2 gimmicks that make it different from the other, but they never overstay their welcomes like in the later X games. They're usually pretty minor, but even the smallest things add to the variety. Spark Mandrill stage has many different sections where the lights are out and there are electric sparks that can shock you at the start of the stage. Armored Armadillo stage is set in a mine and has many construction elements, with even a mini-boss that clears rocks in its path. The level's linearity also adds up to the experience, like you're in a real man-made cave. Launch Octopus's stage is set in an open sea, unlike the classics, and the added jump height can make your experience a lot easier. Though this is the only stage that I'd say has a tedious section. This mini-boss is very annoying with the stupid spikes everywhere and I don't even know what its weakness is, so I always die when I get just a little impatient. There are also ships you can destroy to open up new areas. Boomerang stage has you climbing up a tower, which means that it's easily the most vertical level in the game, with a lot of elevators, ladders and wall jumping. Though to be honest, this section on-screen overstays its welcome and is really repetitive, and this laser part I have no idea how works. Storm Eagle's stage has many sections of tight platforming, not without shooting of course, and is probably the least linear with hidden upgrades and pickups all over the place. Flame Mammoth stage takes place in a factory, meaning that it has conveyor belts and snakehead generators. This stage also has these minor enemies that throw pickaxes, and I feel like this would have been more fitting in Armored Armadillo stage. Chill Penguin and Sting Chameleon are the only ones that I say don't do much with their teams. Chill Penguin doesn't even have ice, like at all. That would mean slippery physics, but that wouldn't be a problem here, I think. Sting Chameleon is just a straight line with enemies on it. This does kinda work since the level is spent in a forest, so making things like ceilings and walls would be unfitting. But was it too difficult to make a treetop section with branches that fall and stuff? I don't know. These two stages are probably my least favorites. While not even close to being bad, I feel like the other levels invested me more. This does kinda come off as weird since it's Mega Man. What the fuck is up with immersion and atmosphere? I know that Mega Man is a gameplay-focused franchise, but analyzing these things makes you realize how deep this stuff is. If we're talking on a gameplay perspective, Mega Man X's level design is serviceable, I guess. As I said, it's still fun and all, but there could have been more done with it. At places it feels kinda generic, if that makes any sense. By the time you reach the final stages in the game, the levels are basically enemies gang-banging you with little to no platforming. As we all know, Mega Man isn't all about the levels, but also its bosses. Just like in the classics, at the end of every stage, you fight its boss. This, I think, is the point where I should bring up the leg parts issue again. In the classics, you start with max health and there are no enchantments, so fighting a boss first or last, with a buster, has the same feeling. This isn't a thing in the X series, so that would mean either all the bosses being too easy, too hard, or horribly unbalanced. The last one applies to this game. On one hand, you have bosses like Chill Penguin, Flame Mammoth, and Storm Eagle that are pretty easy, but on the other hand you have Spark Mandrill, Armored Armadillo, and Sting Chameleon that are difficult even when upgraded. Now Chill Penguin you can fight without the dash, but the other bosses have attacks, or in Spark Mandrill's case, hitboxes, that are basically unavoidable. Storm Eagle and Lunch Octopus have attacks that suck you in or blow you out that are at a higher speed than you're walking. Now you probably can beat all the bosses without the leg parts, but then you're at such a disadvantage that it's basically suicide. The leg part problem is prevalent throughout the stages too, but here is where it shows its ugly head. If we look past the dash issues, and have the leg parts too, the boss fights are mostly good. When using a buster, I think they all give you a decent, challenging fight, with the easier ones being exceptions, minor exceptions. I wouldn't really be able to pick a favorite boss fight, Boomer Kuwanger comes to mind, but at least favorite... boy. Armored Armadillo may be an iconic maverick, but his fight is atrocious! You can only hit him at points and he takes forever to kill because of that. To be fair, his attacks are mostly well telegraphed, and if you're patient enough, this boss might not be as bad, but it's still a tedious and repetitive boss fight. The rest, if I think about it, never really reached the point of greatness, but they're still enjoyable. Sting Chameleon and Lunch Octopus have shitty and avoidable attacks, but it's not something I would die over. But like in the classics, each boss has a weakness. And do you remember a boss called Metal Man? Yeah, the guy who dies in one hit from a special weapon. Well, imagine that level of challenge, but for each boss. Okay, went way too far, but the weaknesses make these bosses so much less fun and interesting. They would end up in a pattern made for you to hit them even more. This has been dubbed the Spark Mandrill Syndrome because that fight in particular is notorious for this reason. Though not all bosses react to special weapons in any sort of different way. In fact, most of them take them like buster shots, just with more damage. The weaknesses take away most of the challenge and I only use them in the boss rush. So about the weaknesses themselves, I mean the special weapons. I'm immediately gonna say it, they are fucking amazing, to the point that a few are overpowered. Shotgun Ice doesn't have a high damage output, but hitting a ball splits it into 5 pieces that, with precision, can prove very useful. The Electric Spark is probably the weakest. There are a few good uses for it, but I find other weapons more versatile. Rolling Shield acts kinda like Surge Snake from Mega Man 3, but just more useful mid-air, higher damage and a bigger hitbox. The Homing Torpedo may be slow, but the fact that it follows enemies is enough to make it one of the most useful weapons in the game. Boomerang Cutter is the rolling cutter from Mega Man 1, except it can also draw in pickups and other things. In addition to that, if you use it during their boss fights, Flame Mammoth's trunk and Launch Octopus's tentacles will be cut off, taking away some of their attacks. Chameleon Sting may seem a bit difficult to use, but with proper skill and timing, it's a killing machine. Storm Tornado and Fire Wave are both known, the former especially, for being OP as fuck. Storm Tornado kills most mini-bosses and larger enemies in sometimes just one hit, and Fire Wave is a flamethrower with a high damage output, so the weapons on their own are already great and make this game so much more enjoyable with the kind of variety they can add to the gameplay. But they can also be charged up. To be honest, I am not the biggest fan of these. There are uses for most of them, but by the time they're charged up, like a half of health has been lost. I still find the base weapons more useful, with the only true exception being the Rolling Shield, which is great for farming sub-tank energy, but that's about it. I mean, when am I gonna use the upgraded Boomerang Cutter? The charged weapons are fine, but they are so situational that there's sometimes no point to it. So the weapons, great shit. The only thing I would fix would be OP-ness of some weapons, but they're still useful and honestly one of the best parts of this game. So it's about the time we get into the real spoiler section. After you meet with Zero outside of Sigma's castle, you begin the first stage, which has easily the most bullshit amount of enemies in the whole game. This section is probably unbeatable without the upgraded Chameleon Sting, but it's still a fine stage. It sets the mood really well, and this is the only point where I think the story is done very well with the wild fight. The fight itself is nothing really that special, though it's cool that he uses attacks used in the intro boss fight. The main boss of this stage is a giant spider, and this is where I gave up when I was younger. And even now I find it frustrating since the guy moves really fast and you can't possibly predict where it'll go next. This boss sucks. The second stage is more standard stuff. Like I seriously don't know what to say here. It's a fairly typical Mega Man stage, and that's not a bad thing per se, but there's nothing distinguishing this level from the others. The boss here is a room with ice and moving walls and teeth and... okay, seriously don't know what to say, but pretty good boss fight I guess. The third stage is mostly a boss rush with small sections with health pickups in between. Yeah, there's a boss rush, but instead of going into 8 capsules, you find the bosses one by encountering them in stages. I prefer this approach, but still there shouldn't have been a boss rush if you ask me. The main boss of this stage is fairly okay. It's a car with a face and a high damage output. I kept getting hit here, but that's because of my impatience, but it has a learnable pattern. Lastly, the fourth stage is the final boss. First you fight a dog. Then Sigma reveals himself as a Jedi and fights you. His pattern is ridiculously exploitable and it's hard pulling off getting hit. After dealing with him, you move to the final phase. Boy. If you don't have sub-tanks here, prepare to go pick them up, because without them, you'll have a real bad time. But even with sub-tanks, this boss is difficult to learn and dying means fighting the boss again. But your sub-tank energy doesn't get refilled, so you have to farm. Thankfully, there is an infinitely respawning enemy that always gives you pickups. In addition to that, you can hit Sigma only in the head with the rolling shield, so make sure you don't waste anything. The final boss is a very big difficulty spike, especially for beginners, and it's fittingly the hardest part of this game, but it doesn't exactly test the skills you earned throughout the game, and feels kinda anticlimactic because of that, in addition to him being a literal background. Still, an okay boss fight, but could have been miles better. After that, the credits roll. Before we end this review, there are a few dumb things that don't mean much, but I felt like talking about. Firstly, the ride armors. They appear in a total of 3 stages, and are clunky to control and don't mean much of anything. I don't find them nearly as interesting as some people do, but hey, you do you. Pickups will pause the game for a short time to refill your health just like in the classics, which I don't like. In fact, I died once because of this. Even though the game isn't graphically demanding, there are many sections where the game would slow down, usually when there are many explosions and objects. Lastly, some dumb glitches. While the game is very stable, there are 3 I wanted to point out. First, going above the ceiling in Flame Mammoth stage makes the whole stage broken and green. You can make the text box appear at the wrong time in the Wild vs Zero battle, which can trigger another glitch I couldn't pull off. Also, during invincibility frames in this elevator section, you can teleport on top of these platforms. This is the only glitch you'll trigger to normal play at some point. Despite how negative I might have come off in this review, I still love this game to pieces. Maybe I didn't want to seem nostalgic or anything, but this is one of those games where the biggest problems are really minor and it never gets outright bad. There is a lot of genius to Mega Man X's design and everything surrounding it. It may have messed up in a few instances, but Mega Man X is still a great game to this day and is highly worth it. Though if you're planning on getting into the series, then I would recommend you to start with a classic game and not this one, because the difficulty balancing might be too much. As for me, I can totally understand why everyone loves this game so much, because I'm one of those people. Mega Man X is a game that means a lot to me and I could play it time and time again and just simply not get sick of it, making it easily one of my favorite retro games.